Hey y'all, Austin here with Outer World Media. Welcome back to another book review, guys. This is one that this might be a little bit of a longer video than normal for a book review. And the reason is there's so much to talk about in this book and dissect. I feel like you could probably make like a 30-minute review out of talking about this book. I'm going to do my best not to have that be the case. I will say up front, I did just finish this book, so stuff's pretty fresh in my mind. And another thing I want to say up front, I normally talk at the end of the video how, this book may not be for these, certain type of people, or if you don't like this in a book, you probably won't like that. This is probably definitely going to be one of the most divisive books that I've read and reviewed. But let's get into it. Without any further interruption, let's get into it. I am talking about a book. This is the first time I've read a book by this author. That is Mr. William Johnstone. And I am talking about book one in the Ashes series, specifically Out of the Ashes. So if you are new to the channel, or this is your first time seeing a video by me, or even if have been subscribed, or if you've watched a few of my videos, just in case you missed how I got this book in the series, I'll tell you about that. So long story short, where I live here in West Texas, they have once a month, they have a local library sale. Books are super cheap, so I normally stock up on them and get as many as I can for a good price. Well, I happen to be looking in a section of books, and they happen to have book one, and then book one and two, and then like 4 through 23, I believe, in paperback variation like this. And so I picked them up. They were like 50 cents a book. And I've seen a lot by this author. And I'm not going to lie, I have the first three books on my Kindle. I bought them because they're like $2 at one point in time. And I was like, you know what, if I don't like them, it's $2. And they've been sitting on my Kindle, and I forgot about them until I saw these at the local library sale. So I bought them, and did a book haul, I should say, showing this series off and whatnot. And so I figured, you know what, with the year winding down and whatnot, let's get at least book one of this. And it's like a 32 or 34 book series, so I have over half of them. So I have, and long story short, I have the first 23 books in this series. So I figured, you know what, I probably should start it and see if I even like it. I probably shouldn't have bought that many books, not know if I'm going to like a series, but that's just kind of the reader I am. If I think I'm going to like a series, I'll go all in and buy that series if I can find it at a great price. So what is, Out of the Ashes about? Let's begin there. I'm going to read the back here real quick. Ben Raines contacted us. The message had gone out on CB radio and up on billboards as a national. Sorry, let me start over again. Reading is hard, guys. Ben Raines contacted us. The message had gone out on CB radio and up on billboards as a nation brought to its knees by nuclear holocaust begins to regroup and look for a strong leader. Ben Raines, a retired soldier and a mercenary known throughout the world for his best-selling novels, expounding an American far different than the one that exists, is one of the survivors and does not want to be put in charge of anyone or anything. As he travels across the country searching for his family, Ben discovers that his weapons and knowledge of survival techniques are among his most valuable assets, and that we have learned nothing from the war. Finally tired of battling alone against the roving gangs and the repressive rule of the new government, Ben contacts the soldiers and civilians of the resistance forces, leading them to an isolated area of the West. There in tri-states, the threat his vision of America presents to the established order brings the final outrage, an armed attack by government forces. America itself hangs in the balance, and Raines must win to bring the country out of the ashes. So I think that sums the book up very, very well. And to kind of give you a little bit how I would describe it, I generally like to do that. Essentially what happens is the world has kind of just gone to crap. We have this these renegades that have started getting forces and whatnot, gaining in numbers and whatnot. And so the government finds out about this, and tensions are high in the world, and essentially it leads to a nuclear war. Now, what I will say about this book, this takes place years ago, so there are nuclear warheads, but they're not necessarily in this book ones that are going to destroy everything. They're obviously going to make an explosion or not, but they're not going to be ones that have chemicals in them to kill certain people within a certain mile radius and whatnot. While there are a couple of those that are deployed, it's mostly just regular nuclear warheads. So essentially, this book is 3 parts. You have part 1, which is us seeing what's leading up to this nuclear holocaust and whatnot, and kind of bouncing around between mostly American leaders, but we get the point of view from a couple different other regions and countries, and just kind of see everything that leads up to, again, just all these countries going after one another. And so as we are reading this, and again, I try to make this spoiler free, as we are reading the first part, you will find out a couple things that will come to play later on in the book. But again, we're kind of introduced to our main character, Ben Raines. Like the back blurb here says, he has knowledge. He was a mercenary. He was in Vietnam. He was... And I forget what they call him in the book. He's higher up than, like, more dangerous than like a Green Beret or a Navy SEAL. When they talk about what his description of what his job name was in the military, even the Green Berets and the Marines, the Air Force, the Navy SEALs, they look up to him. He was an elite op. Essentially, he is somebody you don't want to mess with by any means. So again, in part 1, we're kind of introduced to Ben, as well as see how, like I said, everything comes to fruition, and, again, everything just goes to crap and whatnot. And then from there, as we go into part 2 of this book, part 2 essentially is Ben just kind of traveling around the U.S. Like the back says, he's looking for his family and whatnot, and he comes across, other survivors, and Ben essentially figures out in the first part of book 2 is how I describe of the second part of this book. He realizes, hey, I probably should write a book. And so that's also what leads him to want to travel around. Now, I will say in part 2 of this book, we're very, very much introduced to other characters in this world, the world that William Johnstone has created. And we are very quickly led to realize that Ben Raines is kind of a player. He really is. Women just find him attractive and whatnot. And there's some scenes in this book, I'm not going to lie, it's like reading a Gunsmith book. If you've read that, if you haven't, there's some very much adult content in this book. I'll leave it at that. If you're somebody who, or you enjoy that, I'm not one who reads to or enjoys reading that. I don't look down on anybody that does, but if that's something that you like, that is in this book, now, if you're somebody who can't avert your eyes like hide and read, you might enjoy this. Those scenes in this book. But again, part 2 is just Ben driving around, the U.S. and whatnot. And as he travels, the more he realizes nobody's learned their lesson. Like the government, everybody's still depending on the government in this. And that's the big thing in this book is, in the second part, as he's driving around talking to everybody that is willing to talk to him for the most part, talks about how they're going to wait on the government. They're just waiting on them. And Ben can't comprehend why nobody is trying to take advantage of the situation and help themselves. And so as, he travels around, we kind of see him get more and more irritated with that and whatnot. And it eventually leads up to part 3, where part 2, the very end of part 2, Ben essentially he realizes, you know what, somebody's going to have to do something. Somebody's going to have to make a society where, troublemakers, thieves, people that, murderers, people that do horrible, terrible stuff and things, and liars and whatnot, where they can't be there. And so essentially Ben ends up getting in contact with these rebels, is what they're called, and says, hey, let's make an area, let's do this. And so, they end up making what they call the tri-states. And again, I don't think I'm spoiling anything in this. But again, they end up making the tri-states. I believe it was like Montana, Wyoming. I could be wrong. There's like three states stacked right on top of one another. Let me see here. And I do apologize. I know I need to know my states and whatnot, but cut me some slack. It's late on a Saturday night. I just finished this book, so I know there's gonna be people out there that are gonna give me some crap. You have Montana, Wyoming, and I believe it was Colorado, if not Utah, that they turn into this like mini state, this mini country within the United States and whatnot. And so, and that's kind of where we're introduced, led up to at the end of part two. And part three is just them living in this, and we see years have passed. It's been like 9 years, have passed since they started this, and the U.S. government has kind of slowly gotten back together and whatnot, and the new leader does not like the tri-states, and the tri-states do not like the new leader of the U.S. and whatnot. And so we see that the U.S. and the tri-states go to war. And so that's what part three is about. And I'm not going to lie, guys, kind of getting into stuff that I did and didn't like about this. And this is something that I can't help but just openly talk about on here, because I am honest. I don't want somebody, thinking that I'm lying in my reviews. I don't know why anybody would do that. Start off with stuff that I didn't like. This book is very, very realistic. And what I mean by that is just the way and the just human nature, unfortunately, and how some people refer to other people and things that they do in a lawless society. If that is something, and I don't want to dive too much into what it is. I think you could probably guess what I'm talking about. Slurs against other people, acts committed against other people, descriptions of what happens, and just some hard scenes to read. If that's not something that I don't want to say like, if that's not something that you would find, how do I put this? If that's something that you don't want to read at all, you don't want to think about it, you don't want to have that in a book that you read. I'll put it that way. If you don't want to read a book that has that type of stuff in there, because I don't think anybody would want to like to read that or want to read that. If you don't want to read a book that has that type of stuff in there, I would not pick this up. I really wouldn't. Again, there are slurs thrown in there. There are acts of violence committed against one another. There are, if you're somebody, you don't like the Lord's name getting taken in vain, I would not recommend this book at all, in all honesty. It kind of, and I understand people talk like that, but it kind of deterred me a little bit, because it felt like every other paragraph had that term in here, taking the Lord's name in vain, that term, and I think you know what I'm talking about, had that in here, and I didn't enjoy it. I don't like hearing it. Other people say it. I sure as heck don't like reading it, and I don't like reading slurs against other people of other nationalities and all that. But again, it's in here, and I realize that this is the world, unfortunately, and ideally we'd like a perfect society and whatnot. Unfortunately, like I said, we don't live in that. So I will give Mr. Johnstone that he didn't shy away from that, and I'm sure that probably wasn't easy for him. Again, it's just something I didn't like, was just, again, certain things that happened in this book. Another thing as well that I didn't like about this book, and I touched on it a little bit, again, I could have done without a little bit more in-depth of what two people were doing by themselves. Again, I could have gone without that. It's kind of a nitpick at this point. I mean, I've read a Gunsmith book. Again, it's not something that I'm going to bash on. Again, that's kind of a little bit of a nitpick. The other thing as well, I don't know, guys. Again, just the way and the way that Mr. Johnstone, and again, this is the first book I've ever read by him. The way that he had written this, I would have liked to have seen more of them building the tri-states and more of like how they were to set up a defense for the towns or the states. I would have really enjoyed like a map in this. That's kind of, and again, it's a nitpick. It really is. I would have enjoyed having a map in here, like even the front, even like a couple pages just showing the tri-states and how they're laid out and where each town was and how the defense is set up for each town. Again, something like that I would have enjoyed. Just to have an idea of that, again, in my mind, I really like that. So, again, that's kind of a nitpick. Now, getting into the stuff that I did like about this book. This really was a good book. I really enjoyed this book. Aside from the stuff that I said I didn't like, this one, the idea of this book being in three parts, and part one being setting up with the main character and how we came to this nuclear war and whatnot, and then part two being our main character being, I think, how anybody would normally be and just want to see how the rest of the country is, and you have the ability to just pick a car and drive around and whatnot and just see and get supplies and whatnot. I really enjoyed that. And then the end of part two, establishing the tri-states and whatnot, and then part three being the climax of the tri-states and the U.S. kind of coming head to head. Again, I really enjoyed that. The end of this book, I'm not gonna lie, guys. I like I said, I just finished reading it and gave it a few minutes to let it kind of soak in. Came to do this review. The end of this book, it'll wreck you. It really will. It'll tug at your heartstrings, unfortunately. But unfortunately, and I'm not going to delve into why. Again, for being what I thought was going to be like a Rambo-esque book, like we had this main character and whatnot. There definitely is some heart. You definitely do grow attached to some of the characters in this book. And another thing I will say. This book, I'm not going to lie, this book was definitely written by a guy, for a guy. I'm not going to lie in that aspect. Again, this is leaning towards, the men's adventure fiction category. So again, if you're somebody who, like I said, if you've kind of heard what I've said and you're kind of on the fence, I checked before doing this. I think Kindle has the first book on sale for like $2, so I would definitely give it a try. Now, some other things, if you are that I think other people may or may not enjoy. Like I said, the way people treat each other in this book. If you are not wanting descriptions of, how do I put it, of animal stuff that might happen to animals, because again, Mr. Johnstone is very realistic in this book. I did enjoy reading it. There's a couple scenes. It's not much, but there's a couple scenes. I'm just putting that out there for you. The big thing that I really, really liked about this book, and it kind of, again, I didn't enjoy reading it, but he makes this book so realistic and just how people are towards each other. And again, it's not something that we enjoy hearing, again, certain names, this and that and whatnot. And this will be the last time I touch on that subject. But Mr. Johnstone writes this to be very realistic. Just, again, how people interact, how certain people behave towards one another, and just the idea. And this book really touches on the certain aspects, political aspects, that I'm not going to delve into because that's not what this channel is for. I think in today's atmosphere, I think this book is a little bit more understandable for the characters and just how he's written them and their beliefs and whatnot. So again, I think this book's a little bit more prevalent now than it may have been when it was written. But again, guys, I really, really enjoyed this book, and I'm coming up on 20 minutes. I said I was going to try to make this short and sweet. I really enjoyed this book. Again, I think I am forewarning you about certain things that I know some people are not going to like about this book or that happens in this book. But again, guys, Out of the Ashes, if you come across this, if you have a Kindle, if you have a phone, an iPad, whatnot, I would, if this sounds interesting to you, I will say that go on Amazon, buy the Kindle book. I think you might enjoy this. Again, I think and I will say it kind of drug a little bit for me. It really took into halfway into part two for me to really start enjoying this book. The first part and a half, I enjoyed it, but it was kind of about halfway through part two, I really started to enjoy this. So again, guys, you have been forewarned about certain aspects of this book that you may or may not like. But again, guys, Out of the Ashes by William Johnstone, this is definitely a series that I will be continuing. Obviously, I have 22 more books in the series that I own in paperback variation. But again, guys, I really enjoyed this book. I would give this like a 4 out of 5. The ending, again, it'll tug at your heartstrings. It really will. There's one scene in particular that, even if I think about it now, it's definitely tugging at my heartstrings. So again, guys, Out of the Ashes by William Johnstone, I highly recommend this book. Again, it's not going to be for everybody, but that's how most books are. They're not going to be for everybody. They have a certain audience that they're intended for, or that might enjoy it, and this is definitely one of those books. Highly, again, recommend this book, though. As always, hope you guys have a good one. Y'all stay safe.